We're looking at training methods for year 10 exercise and sports science. We're going to have a think about the way you can successfully train in order to bring about adaptations that are specific to the sport that you have chosen. And while we look at this as a general concept, today we're going to be looking at as a part of your project. So for your project, you have selected fitness components that you believe are important to your sport. And now what you need to do is select 3 of those fitness components and design a week of training. You only need to select 3, but according to the principle of frequency, it needs to be targeted 3 times at least in order to produce adaptations. Some you might like to do more, for example, aerobic-based training. Training that involves power or speed, you'll need to think about recovery days. Some you might like to package deal, put them together. For example, power and speed can be targeted together in the same training session. Some will be separate, for example, flexibility. If you go back to your fitness components that you have selected, you might find you might need to make some adjustments. That's okay. You can add another fitness component to your project if this helps you undertake your training design a little bit better. Let's have a look at some of these training methods now. So interval training. Interval training is where you undertake a period of effort followed by a period of rest. It's different from fartlek training, which is where you undertake a period of lower intensity and then a period of high intensity. So fartlek training is constant moving. Interval training is work with rest. You can see there's 4 different types of interval training that you might like to use. Don't worry too much about the energy system at the moment. That will come later when we discuss energy systems. Have a think about the fitness components that are worked when you look at the intensity and duration. So for short, we're looking at maximal. The effort is between 5 to 15 seconds. You can think about how many times you might like to do this. You might like to do this 10 times within your particular session. You might like to repeat that for a couple of sets. But we have a think about for 5, 15 seconds at maximal intensity, power and aerobic capacity and speed are going to be relevant fitness components. Intermediate, we're looking at still high intensity for 15 to 60 seconds. So very similar fitness components to short, perhaps anaerobic capacity even more so. And for long interval training, we're talking about greater than 60 seconds and up to 5 minutes worth of work. So that is going to suit aerobic power and it's also going to suit your muscular endurance there. HIIT can be varied. HIIT's a bit of a tricky one. If you ask 10 different trainers what HIIT means, they'll probably all tell you different things. It can be manipulated for most sports. Generally, it's periods of work followed by periods of rest doing the same activity, so cycle, run, etc. But more recently, it's included in a circuit type manner with different types of circuit-based activities. If you're going to choose that, just call it circuit training for all intensities. So here you can target lots of different fitness components. You just need to manipulate how hard and how long. It does tend to be at quite a high intensity though. So interval training. Circuit training. Haven't put the specifics of circuit training in terms of fixed load, etc. in this. I've just put a little bit of an idea of what circuit training looks like. So there's lots of different stations and you rotate around those stations performing a certain amount of time or a certain number of reps with a load there. Really adaptable for lots of fitness components. So while this list isn't completely exhaustive, you could do speed by putting a little shuttle run in there. You could do power by doing box jumps. You can see there's an example of that here. The girls doing box jumps, local muscular endurance. You could do strength by doing something with a high load. You could do agility, which is a tricky one to do in a training program, but you could do an agility station. When you're designing your training program, if you're doing circuit training, it might be nice to have some little pictures of some of the circuit activities that you do, just to make that aesthetically very nice for us to look at. Similarly with resistance and weight training, if you're choosing to target strength, power, or muscular endurance, and you're wanting to do this, put in a few pictures. When we look at this, and this is good for your revision as well, when we look at this, I want you to have a think about the variable that shows you that strength is being targeted, power and endurance. Hypertrophy is there just for your information. That just means muscle growth there. We're looking at the first 3 rows. So when you look at strength, 1 maximal contraction against a resistance, have a look and have a think about the variable that you think is easiest to pick. I hope most of you came up with heaviest. If you're lifting a really heavy load, and what we're looking at here is the percentage of 1 RM. 1 RM is the maximum amount that you can lift once. So we're looking at maybe 80% of what you can lift once. So if you could do a 60 kilo squat once, then your strength program works at 80% of that. So something like 50, 55 percent or kilos, sorry. When we're looking at reps, you're only going to be able to lift that a couple of times. Have a look at power. What variable stands out to you? Hopefully you're looking at the pace. It's fast, it's explosive. You're not going to be able to do that with a really heavy weight. And endurance, what stands out to you? Hopefully you're looking at the reps greater than 15. You can prescribe these within your training program. If we have a look down at a sample question, just out of interest, a sort of question that you might get on a test while we're here, which of the following loads we're looking at what percentage of RM, reps and sets are appropriate to develop the fitness component. So we look at strength here. We said strength, the variable that we're looking at is a high load percentage. That's a low load, so it's definitely not that one. Power, what are we looking at here? We're looking at load in the middle. Yeah, potentially. Reps potentially. Sets potentially. What about endurance here? So that's an option here. Endurance here, 70 to 90%. 15 to 100, that's way too high and way too heavy, so it's not that. And hypertrophy, which is strength-based, is going to be high RM, it's not that. So it's going to be P. They didn't have pace there. If we put that in this is a year 12 question, if we put that in a question for you, we'd have pace in there included. But you can work it out by a process of elimination. What would be really good is when you're doing resistance training is have a really good think about the specificity of the activities that you're designing. So lucky us, we've got volleyball at the top. They're looking at the sit-up. That action may represent volleyball dig. The really great projects will have a little bit of an explanation for some of these. The push-up, for example, if you're doing netball or basketball, that push-up, if you think about that, it is mimicking the movement pattern. So we're using the same muscle groups and the same muscle actions as throwing a ball. So it is highly specific. If we're looking down at the tennis serve, it's a similar muscle group. And the water polo shot down the bottom, a pulley throw, that is mimicking perfectly. You can see the muscle groups. So when you're doing resistance and you need to do at least 6 different stations for resistance or circuit, have a think about the activity and make sure that is going to be specific to your needs. Now, we're talking about flexibility. We're looking at 2 different types of flexibility training. And just see a spell check there. Athlete, correct that. Have a think about whether you want to do static or dynamic. Static is really good for a rest day. You can see a description of it is taken through a range of motion and held for longer than 10 seconds, whereas dynamic is constant moving. So dynamic you could put at the end of a training session potentially. Static you'd have on a rest day. It doesn't really matter where you have it generally. However, have a think about if you've got a maximal explosive session, don't put a dynamic session directly after that where you're continuously moving. A static session would belong there. So there's lots of variability there, but just be mindful that dynamic, you're still using energy. And if you've done an explosive session, then you might need to have a rest after that. Speaking about explosive sessions, if we're looking at plyometric training is predominantly muscular power. It can improve speed and agility, but it's mainly muscular power. It improves explosiveness. So things that are explosive, box jumps, clap push-ups, med ball slams, all work plyometric training. It involves improving the elasticity of the muscle, and it helps the messages being sent from the brain speed up to make you more explosive. It can be really specific to target jumping, to target sprinting and developing those sorts of characteristics, which may be highly specific for your sport. You can set it up in a similar way to a circuit training, but be mindful that you need to have lots of rest in there because it is very demanding on the body. Just out of interest to build up in terms of what you want to do, so work from low intensity to high intensity. So interestingly, a low intensity plyometric activity is skipping. So you could have skipping as an activity, and high intensity is going to be more like your clap push-ups, very tricky, as well as your box jumps. You want to develop skill first, and you should recommend to do, because we're targeting muscular power, maybe between 6 and 10 reps. Maybe you could start out easy at the 6 because you don't want to have fatigue interfere with the technique because you run the risk of injury or getting really sore. You will get delayed onset muscle soreness with plyometric. That's okay. That means you're rebuilding and adapting and getting stronger, but you don't want to become injured. And make sure you have a rest day. So that's really important for your training program. Make sure that you have a rest day to allow for full recovery. So what you should do from here, you should create I'm not quite sure what's wrong with fitness there. They want it to be lower. Right. Doesn't really make sense, does it? But anyway, if you're completing a table, you might like to start by writing your fitness components. So your 3 fitness components Under there, we'll just insert a row below. So write your 3 fitness components here and brainstorm all the possible training methods that you could do. Additionally, as part of an ILT activity, that lowercase f is really bothering me now that I've had to put that in. Additionally, as part of your revision and part of your ILTs, you could write all the fitness components and the training methods. You might have to design a quick training program or a training session for a designated fitness component in a test. So it is a good way to get your head around the understanding of this, not just the knowledge face to this. So I hope that sets you up well for your task 3. For your task 3, or mastery task 3, it would be ideal to have a general weekly outline that says the fitness sessions that you are doing, the training methods that you're using, and the fitness components you are targeting, and then go and draw those out a little bit.